All right, 7th graders, in lesson 4.6, we're going to talk about rational numbers, okay? This term rational numbers means numbers that we can write as a fraction. They have to have a whole number on the top and the bottom in order for it to be a real fraction, a true fraction, or a rational number. Rational numbers can be positive or negative. So, for example, on a number line, you can write 0 as a fraction, 0 over a number. So any number with a 0 as the numerator is a rational number. Okay? A 0 in the denominator, is that a rational number? No, it's not a rational number. If you put that in your calculator, a number divided by 0. If you put that in your calculator right now, a number divided by 0, you get an error. It's a 0 error. That's not even a real number. Okay? So, for 0, the 0 has to be in the numerator. 0 in the numerator. So you can't divide by 0. You can't have a 0 in the denominator. Okay? There's other numbers that are irrational that you can't write as fractions. For example, the ratio pi. Okay? That's a decimal that goes on and on and on. I think it's 3.141596254, something like that. And it goes on and on and on in this random pattern, and it never ends. So that's an irrational number. We can't take this number because it never ends. You can't take this number and write it as a fraction. Okay? But some repeating decimals you can write as fractions. For example, 0.3 repeating, or 3/10 repeating. What is that as a fraction? Do you remember? Oh, come on, people. 3/10 repeating. What is that as a fraction?
3 over 10. 10 over 3.
Oh, what's that? That would be 3/10, just 0.3. That's a rational number. 3/10 is, you can write as a fraction. How about 3/10 repeating? No clue, no idea what that is as a fraction? It's the fraction
3/10.
No, that would be 0.3. This is 0.3 repeating.
Oh, how do you know it's repeating?
Because it has the repetent sign above it.
Oh.
Repeating sign. Okay? Let's say we're talking about numbers between 0 and 1. Okay? What is halfway between 0 and 1?
0.5.
0.5. What is that as a fraction? Since we're talking about rational numbers, we can write that as a fraction, right?
1/2.
1/2. Okay? Put that in your notes. Put all these in your notes, please. What's the opposite of 1/2?
1/4.
No, the opposite. Negative 1/2. Yep. Yep. What is half of negative 1/2?
Negative 3.1. Negative 3.
Think. 1/4. That's halfway. What is that as a decimal?
0.25.
Good, 0.25. Now we're starting to think. What's the opposite of that?
Negative 0.25.
Yep. And negative 1/4. Yep. So negative fractions. Notice that the fractions, the negative fractions get larger. They have a larger absolute value as you move to the left, and a larger absolute value as you move to the right, away from 0. So 0 is zero, nothing, right? And then their absolute value gets larger as you move further to the left or further to the right. Now, 3/10 repeating. Where would that fit then on this number line? 3/10 repeating. Devlin?
Right before 0.5.
Yeah, it would be past the 0.25 and before the 0.5.
Jeez, Julie.
And so, what do you think now? It kind of gives you a clue about what the fraction would be. It'd be between 1/4 and 1/2. 1/3, very good. 1/3 is 3/10 repeating. So we could write that as a fraction. That's a rational number.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
It's like 3.
1 divided by 3. What's 1 divided by 3 on your calculator? Look at that.
3.
No, 1 divided by
1.
3. 3 divided by 1 is 3.
0.3333333333.
Right. Yep, and it keeps going. Right?
Well, it doesn't say that.
Yep. Now, one of the things that you'll have to do then in this, from this lesson, is put fractions and negative fractions on a number line. Okay? So, make sure that you count up the segments that are listed. Andrew, stop talking. Count up the segments and figure out what the interval is. Andrew. It's enough. I'm trying to teach, and you're distracting. Okay? Quit distracting people. The pen clicking, right? The talking. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Thank you. So, what was I saying? Oh, on the number line. What you have to do is, they'll label some numbers, okay? And then you'll have to count the intervals to figure out what the other numbers are on the number line. So look at, for example, example 2 on page 206. There it shows a number line, just like mine on the board. -1 and 0 and 1 are listed. And then -1/2. And then you would have to find +1/2 and -8/10 would be close to -1. So they show -8/10 here. So you'd have to mark that on the number line and mark it with a dot, okay? And then -2/10. Where would -2/10 go on this number line? Would it be to the left of this or to the right of it? -2/10. Maya? To the right, yeah, it'd be closer to 0. Because this is -25/100. It has a larger absolute value. It's further away from 0. -2/10 would be just to the right of that. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Then, how do you write equivalent fractions? How do you find equivalent fractions? For example, how would you find an equivalent fraction to 1/6. Aiden?
You could say like 5/30.
Okay, how did you find 5/30? Converting 1/6 to 5/30.
So multiply, whatever you multiply one, I have to multiply the other one. So I
Good.
said 5.
So if you multiply both the top and the bottom number by 5, you convert it and find a equivalent fraction. What about a negative fraction? So for example, how would you find negative 5/9, an equivalent fraction? Kaden?
Okay, so yeah, it's 5 times the 2, and then the 9 times the 2.
Good. So again, you just multiply by the same number. It could be a positive or,
A negative.
yep. Let's see. As long as you multiply them both by the same. However, I would just stick with positive because that way, if it's negative, it stays negative. If it's positive, it stays positive. Okay. So an equivalent fraction, it would have to be negative. Negative 10/18, for example. And one thing about negatives with fractions is that you can put the negative sign wherever you want to make the fraction negative. Okay? So, for example, we need to make this fraction negative. We could put the negative sign right out in front of it. That makes it negative. Okay? Or we could put the negative sign next to the 10. That makes it negative. Or next to the 18, that makes it negative. Does this make it negative?
No, that two negatives
I
equals
think
a
it
positive.
makes it like.
Right. What does this mean? How can we reduce this?
You can divide it
By
by
negative
2. By negative 2.
If we divided this by negative
Then
2,
it would be negative 5, and then negative 9 is true.
no, it wouldn't be negative 5. It would be negative divided by negative is positive 5 and positive 9. Okay? A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So if there are two negatives, if it's negative over negative, remember when we reduced fractions that had variables in them? We just did that with like x squared on the top of the fraction and x on the bottom of the fraction. You can cross off one set of x's because there's a top one and the bottom one. If it's y over y on a fraction, you can cross out the y's. Okay? Jacob,
Yes.
why are you distracting the class?
Sorry.
How is that helping?
Sorry.
How is that helping?
I just had this on stuck in my head.
Yeah, but how is that helping us learn?
It's not really.
Yeah, so don't do that, okay? So if you have the same number in the, on the top and the bottom, you can cross them out or reduce them, okay? Any questions on that with fractions? A negative over negative is a what? It's a positive fraction, okay? Now, one of the things you'll have to do is substitute numbers with rational numbers. So, for example, number 15 in your book. So, page 207, number 15, part of your assignment. They list a fraction, but it is in variables, a over b, and you have to substitute the numbers in. Where a is negative 4, and b equals negative 6. Now, whenever you substitute numbers, like it said in your notes, what should you use around those numbers? Parentheses. It helps you to keep the negative sign in the right place and to use it correctly. So, when you substitute, you replace the number with the variable. Or sorry, replace the variable with the number, I should say. So this is negative 4 over negative 6. Is that a positive fraction or a negative fraction? It's a positive. How would we reduce it? Divide both by negative 2. So we have 2/3. Okay? You understand that?
Yeah.
Thumbs up if you understand that one. Jacob, you have a question?
Is this just like the absolute value of it?
Nope, it's the reduced fraction, or the simplest form of this fraction. We're finding simplest form. Okay? How about number 16? Look at number 16. A plus 9 over B. Now, when you have an expression on the top line, you have to think of there being parentheses around it. So you would simplify this first, and then simplify it with the denominator. So if A is negative 4, you would substitute negative 4 in parentheses, plus 9 over negative 6. Okay? And then simplify that. What's negative 4 plus 9? Kaden? 5 over negative 6. Can we reduce that?
No.
Is that a positive or negative fraction? It's a negative because there's only one negative sign. So if you think of this as division, 5 divided by negative 6 would give you a negative answer. So this is a negative fraction. Does that make sense? You're with me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Questions? Good. So let's see. Let's do 2 through 20 evens. Okay?